Welcome to our Emerging Sectors event. We have three amazing panelists, and I won't hold that up much longer. So without further ado, we will start with Dr. Malinin.
Thank you, Chelsea. All right, let me go ahead and share my slide. Okay, everybody seeing that? Great. Okay, well, Ellie asked me to speak a little bit about my career path and specifically about career pathways in evidence-based design. I'm getting over a little cold, so I apologize. I'm gonna be a little froggy today. But this is what my career path looked like. So kind of a snarled mess, definitely not a linear path at all. And so I'll talk a little bit about how my journey and how I got here today. Today, I'm an associate professor of interior architecture and design at Colorado State University and the inaugural director of the Nancy Richardson Design Center. So I would not have anticipated when I was an undergraduate that this is where I would end up, but this is where I did, and I'm very happy about it. So let's just back up just a bit since we're talking about evidence-based design and make sure, since everyone has different experiences, make sure we're all on the same page. So one definition of evidence-based design is the deliberate attempt to base building decisions on the best available research evidence with the goal of improving outcomes and of continuing to monitor the success or failure of subsequent decision-making. And this is one diagram of the evidence-based design process, and really it starts pre-design. It starts with really just establishing whether the team is ready to engage in evidence-based design, and then it follows throughout the design process all the way to post-occupancy and ideally post-occupancy. So following through longitudinally what happens after occupancy in a building. So very simply, oftentimes what in space design looks like is examining human behavior in a space, often through observation and interview. An interview could be survey, or it could be face-to-face interview or focus group. Analyzing human behavior in the space, identifying behavior patterns, and then learning from those behavior patterns, developing design hypotheses that would inform maybe a new pattern, a design pattern that you then evaluate. Some of the challenges that we've seen with evidence-based design is this idea that we need to be careful to fall into this, not to fall into this trap of what's called environmental determinism, which is to assume that because we observe behavior in one setting, that we can completely predict the behavior in a new setting, because there are so many factors that could play in terms of how people respond to their environment. And so we need to kind of avoid this tendency of thinking about our environment as a stimulus that's going to elicit a particular behavioral response. And this is really why we need more people in evidence-based design, more researchers in design, to be able to understand all of the different nuances of a designed environment and how those impact people. So a little bit about me and my background and how I got here. So I do not have a degree in interior design, degree in architecture. I studied architecture at Rice University, and that program is very much about interior spaces, architecture, and the urban context. So it's very much sort of a holistic approach to design. So at that time in my life, I didn't really understand divisions between urban design, architecture, and interiors because of the way that I was educated. So I actually double majored in architecture and art history. And I started working right away as an architect. I was working in a small firm, and I was the intern, and there was one designer, and there was lead architectural designer, and there was the owner. And one day the lead architectural designer didn't show up for work, and the owner did not do design work. And so we were in a pinch, and you know, he said, okay, well, you're going to have to sort of jump in 3 months after graduation and start designing until I can hire someone else. And so I very fortuitously ended up jumping into a lead design role straight out of college is not typical. However, it's sort of the beginning of one of the things that I want to share is to be open to these kinds of experiences. And so this wasn't anything that I would have anticipated, but it definitely was a trajectory for my career. It led to me getting licensed right away. And it led to me taking a very holistic approach to design. So I was mostly doing commercial design at that point, but I was doing everything from the architectural form through to all of the interior specifications because we were a small firm. And so I learned a lot about all different facets of design early on and discovered that I really enjoyed interiors. As I was practicing, you know, my observations were that it was often challenging to predict exactly how a building was going to perform. So sometimes there were design strategies that I would put in place that I thought were going to be highly successful, and they were kind of like, okay, they were all right. Other times, things were more successful than I thought they were going to be, and it was kind of a happy accident. And so this really got my interest peaked in how we could, other than just learning from experience, which is kind of was the tradition in architecture and interiors, how we could better predict the outcomes of spaces. The other thing that I observed as I was practicing, and this is way back when in the early 90s, was that we rarely followed through with our clients to actually see and evaluate how the buildings performed over time. So we assumed we were successful because the same people would keep coming back to us to design more spaces. So we figured we weren't being, you know, we must have been doing a reasonably good job, but we really weren't following through. So this sort of led to a shift in my career path. I had sort of an unusual opportunity, a cold call out of the blue as I was practicing to work with a high school program to develop an architectural education program for this high school program. So I was practicing, I had started to scale back my practice a little bit. I was working for a firm, I was engaged in my own practice. And I decided to sort of take this journey into education. I'd always been interested in education. So I started designing this program, and next thing I know, I was teaching the program, and I was making a shift from practice to education. And it was during that shift that I really became interested in psychology. And I realized that was sort of the missing piece for me. I'd been very interested in theory, and I was, you know, designing a lot of my projects around theory, but I was missing the psychology piece. And so while I was teaching, I went and I decided to get a master's degree, and I got a master's degree in educational technology with an emphasis in psychology. And that was really the shift for me to beginning to think of myself as a researcher. And while originally it was around education, it very quickly evolved into moving into academia. I started teaching, my family moved to Colorado. I started teaching at CU Boulder. And I started teaching in higher education as faculty. And it was in that process that I realized I really wanted to learn more about research. I was beginning to apply research in different ways in my practice. I was still practicing, having an architectural practice on the side as well as teaching. And so I went on and I got a PhD. And that was really the point in my life where I really saw myself shifting from practitioner to researcher. And I ended up getting a joint PhD. So a PhD, it's like a double major in 2 areas. A PhD in design and planning through the College of Architecture and Planning at UC Denver, and in cognitive science through the University of Colorado. And that really is where my research is really at that intersection of cognitive science or cognition and design. And one of the really interesting things about research that I don't think I realized when I was an undergraduate is it's really about coming up with good questions and then trying to figure out how to answer them. So one of the questions that drove my research, my PhD research, was why do certain buildings seem to inspire creativity, or why do some places people feel very attached to some places in terms of helping them feel creative or be creative. So this is an image of the Salk Institute. It was designed by Louis Kahn, and he was commissioned by Jonas Salk, who discovered the vaccine for polio. And Jonas Salk just was struggling with this problem of a vaccine for polio until he went to a monastery in Assisi, Italy, and he had this breakthrough on the vaccine, and he attributed it to the place, which was very interesting. And he felt so strongly about the power of place that he hired Kahn to develop this Salk Institute in La Jolla, California, not to look like the monastery, but to evoke some of the same kind of aesthetic feelings that he had. And I've been to the Salk Institute. I've talked with a lot of the scientists, and they all feel it's a very special and powerful place. So why is that? I started digging in and looking at this idea of place, and there's so many stories of people that feel that place is very powerful motivator for creativity. So Immanuel Kant had a view of a tower from his home office, and when his neighbor's tree grew up, he became distraught. He could never be creative again, and he went out and cut the tree down because it obscured his view. Marcel Proust famously worked in a cork-lined room. Rudyard Kipling wrote several chapters about his working space and his working tools. And it just seemed to go beyond just being attached to place. It seemed to go beyond place attachment. So some of the things that I started studying was this relationship between our physical environment, our behavior, and our thinking, and how these things are much more intertwined than sometimes we think about them. They're not cause and effect. They really are very intermeshed. And so when we're thinking about then how we start to understand how places can support creativity, there are different ways to study this. And one way is to study it more from the psychological perspective. So this is a study that was conducted by Mehta and colleagues looking at coffee shops and creativity. So there are a lot of anecdotes about how people feel feel like they're more productive, they're more creative in coffee shops. And so one of the sort of hypotheses around this is it's a stimulating space. It makes us feel more alert. It makes us feel alive. And maybe the sound is sort of invigorating. And so they conducted a series of experiments trying to kind of get at this. And in their first hypotheses, they thought that coffee shops were sort of invigorating. But what they discovered was that there was sort of a sweet spot in terms of the sound. So at a certain point, as the background sound increased, creativity increased, and then at a certain point, it started to decrease again. And so that once they kind of decided where this sort of sweet spot was, then they started to try to figure out, well, why was it? Is it because people are more alert? And what they found was that it actually had nothing to do with being alert. It had to do with being slightly distracted. So this idea of what's called cognitive disfluency is just a fancy way of saying they were slightly distracted, helped them not fixate on particular lines of thinking, but ultimately help them become more creative and come up with more creative solutions, right? So this is the kind of information that you can observe people being creative in a coffee shop, and you'll see a lot of workplaces start to create these sort of coffee shop settings as a way to inspire creativity, but without really knowing what it is that's inspiring the creativity. We can assume it's social interaction, but in reality, a lot of people work in coffee shops by themselves. So then what do we do with this? Well, it starts to help us understand how our physical environment actually influences our cognitive processing. It actually influences the way that our brain processes information. But then we need to go beyond that a little bit and think about, okay, well, is this true for everyone? And most studies are conducted with what's called neurotypical population. So I have a good friend that I was talking to her about the coffee shop thing, and she said, well, coffee shops don't work for me. And I said, oh, well, why is that? She says, well, actually, I have a cochlear implant that helps me hear. And so I'm not able to sort of let that background noise fade out. It's too distracting for me. So then we start to take this idea that, well, it's not just about the noise, right? It's about the fact that it's a little bit distracting. It's what we might call a positive distraction. And we can start to develop other hypotheses. We can look at other literature and think about what are other ways that we can create positive distractions. And we can do these things with, for example, views of nature. And then we're back to the Salk Institute in that beautiful, majestic setting on the patio where a lot of people like to come out and sit and ideate. So these are sort of the way, this is sort of a way that I think about research, which is what's a practical problem to solve? How can we dig into that problem? What can I do to study that problem? How can I look at what other research has been conducted and develop hypotheses that are more multisensory, that are not just about behavior, but that are about other psychological processes and physiological processes as well. And then how we can use that information to design better learning spaces, better workspaces, healthier or health promoting spaces. So I do a lot of work with aging, dementia, and autism, so neurotypical and also neurodiverse populations. So how would you maybe think about getting involved in evidence-based design? What can you do with your BS in interior design from Colorado State University? Well, you've got a great start because you're studying in a CETA accredited program that really does emphasize research-informed design. In your capstone project, as you learn, for those of you that haven't gotten there yet, in 410, you'll be looking at how to find and evaluate and apply research studies, how to figure out what's a good study, what can we learn from that study, what can we generalize, what can we not generalize to a setting. But there's also other opportunities. So you can get involved in undergraduate research. If you're in the honors program, you can do an honors thesis as part of that. But we also have a lot of faculty who are doing research. And so you can get involved in one of those research studies. So that's a great way to learn about research. And then you can begin to work on some credentials. So for example, your well building credential is really informed by evidence-based design studies. And so that can also help you become more versed in this area. And then the EDAC certification, which is through the Center for Health Design, it really is about conducting evidence-based designs yourself. So if you go into a firm, you can start to become that leader in helping to understand how to use research to inform design strategies. If you want to go a little further, not that you have to get a graduate degree, but a graduate degree is a great place to start to really learn more about specific research methods, how to design your own studies and conduct your own data collection and analysis. And with a master's degree, and I would say more of a master's of science degree as opposed to an MA typically, is going to have more of a focus on research. So our graduate program here in design and merchandising is a research-based program that would teach you this. And then once you have a graduate degree, there are a lot of different courses that might open up as well. So you could start to become the designer who begins to design evidence-based design methods in the projects in a firm. I have a good friend who, with her master's degree, is now working at the Center for Health Design and helping to promote evidence-based design. I have another colleague who actually does research on fine art used in healthcare settings and how art can improve healthcare furnishings, right? Herman Miller, Steelcase, all have research divisions. And then, of course, you can also start to go into academia, which is what I chose to do because I have a lot of time now to do research as well as teach. And so that's also a possibility. And then to take it a step further would be to go for a PhD where you really get more deeply into research. And again, you can use a PhD as a stepping stone to a pathway for a career in academia, or you can use it to become more of a lead researcher, a design director of research, for example, at Gensler or some other architectural design firm, or in or in working in furnishings or other areas. So I think that was my last slide, but I'm just going to double check. Yeah. So that's kind of a summary of sort of my very circuitous career path, and then how that maps onto how you might think about where you might head in your own career. All right, I'm going to stop sharing here.
Thank you, Laura. Next up, we have Katherine Setser.
Thanks. And Laura, you were a great lead-in for me. There are so many things we have in common with slight adaptations. And while I don't have a formal presentation, we could have shared our same first slide. That career path that goes in all this direction. And I suspect that your lives will have a lot more in common with that than perhaps you think, or perhaps you're comfortable with. And one of the things that I'll suggest to you is that it's just a marvelous ride. And, you know, if you'd asked me when I was your age, will I be doing what I'm doing now? Maybe the answer would have been yes, but certainly the path wouldn't have been what I'd imagined. And in reality, it's because I turned right one day instead of left, or I met someone that changed the way I thought about something. Or like Laura, that call that came out of the blue was something that I felt like I needed to listen to and be flexible and think about entertaining, right? So when I started out, so first of all, I began my college career, my undergraduate career, majoring in music. I play the cello. I still play the cello. It's still a great love of mine, but I didn't really know about design, and I discovered design, and I fell in love with design. I also fell in love with lots of other stuff. A guy, which helped sort of direct where I would be living later on. But I also just enjoyed school. I love chemistry, for instance. I was like the only design major that took every chemistry course that was available on the campus, just for the love of it. And I wouldn't understand until much later in my career how all these different interests would come together, because truly they do. And design is a great medium to bring so many of those interests together. So I discovered design, and I did my undergraduate work, interestingly, at the school at which I now teach. And there were things about it that I hated, largely because I attempted a double major in architecture and interior design. And at that time, they were in two different colleges, and there was no love lost between them. In fact, I say I attempted a double major because it was physically impossible. It came down to one class my senior year that had a half an hour overlap between them. And I had one professor that wouldn't let me leave early and another professor that wouldn't let me come late. And so it forced me to make a decision. And that's not a bad thing. I chose interior design, which was a great love of mine, but it changed the way I thought about my career. As frustrating as it was, I knew that deep down there was another way to bring architecture and interior design together. You know, damn it, there's another way to do this. And that directed a lot of my career. So I started looking for opportunities that blended architecture and interior design, and I liked teaching a little bit. I taught on the side, but I eventually early on in my career, I ended up in a medium-sized design firm, about 35 to 40 people. Found myself as the design director, and a great place to start thinking about how we use the process of design to bring these uh, different disciplines together, and not just architecture and interior design, but others, graphic design, right? Engineering, any sort of specialty that you needed. And I guess I should have said, before I got into that firm, I was in Nashville, Tennessee, so I did a lot of design for the stars, by the way. I have some pretty cool projects that were there. They were wonderful, but they really weren't all that overly satisfying, so I wanted something a little bit bigger, a little bit more complex. So I went to this larger firm. And then I started discovering that I had a deep frustration in the design firm because I was solving the wrong problems beautifully. I was being brought into the process too late, doing wonderful design work, but really not solving all the problems because our clients weren't bringing us in necessarily early. We were thought of as some, maybe not an advisor on the very front end of a project, and instead kind of that piece that comes along toward the end. And that was kind of frustrating for me. And the more I really started working with both architecture and design together, I realized that for these two to really marry well, we needed to start really early in the process. And so we created in the design firm a small consulting group that started the notion of design research on the very, very front end of projects. We would think now about that term being more of a strategist, perhaps, but engaging the client in that conversation and really becoming an advisor on what to build, what to design for. And it grew. It grew and grew. And actually, it was kind of interesting because our design firm was being hired all the time to do front-end planning for other design firms' projects. And so we were very excited about this. And one of the partners of the firm and myself launched a firm out of that bigger firm. So we did a lot of the consulting work. And this is where it kind of got interesting, and this is where kind of the universe directs you, however it's going to happen. We found that outside of a large firm, that ability to really start project planning very, very early was hard. Largely because it's hard to market. You, if you're working directly with the end users, you have to convince them or educate them to a problem they don't know they have. And it's a challenge. And when you're an architect or an interior designer, you go in through the facilities door. Change like that happens at the leadership of a company. Right? A vision for what they want for their business and a vision that engages their facility with their business plans. And so we found this a real challenge. We had wonderful, wonderful projects, but we started to discover in this process that while it was a struggle to describe problems on the front end to people who didn't know they had them, on the back end of projects, there were problems and challenges on the forensic side and everybody needed some help with that. And we didn't have the same sort of marketing challenge. So we're talking about front-end services, people don't know they have the issue. On the back end, they know they have a problem, and they really are looking for someone to help you solve that. And as we started thinking about it, we started to realize that the research skills are the same. Really discovering a problem on the front end of a project, or discovering things on the back end. And so we had a little bit of a flip-flop in the trajectory of the firm. We found that we were doing 80% of forensic research, and a lot of that helped us support 20% of the strategic development of new projects. So I started really spending a lot of time on the forensic side. What happened in projects that are in failure? And it can range from all kinds of things. It can be product failure, it can be design failure, it can be design team failure. There's so many ways to look at why things didn't work exactly right, and then begin thinking about how we apply those to the front end. So what can we learn in those errors or issues that can inform and correct the way we do things? And I love, love, love that kind of work. And then I started feeling this little thing in my chest saying, yeah, but you know, funny how clients don't want to pay you to solve that problem for someone else. They want to pay you to solve their problem, but there really aren't ways that we have to effectively get that word out and start engaging the design community in how to change these processes. So that's when I didn't know I needed to do a little more work on the research side of things, and I went back to graduate school. I did a Master of Science degree in architecture, and focused that, as Laura said, that research-based degree allows you to really hone in on particular problems. And so I spent a lot of time looking at processes, looking at our design profession, looking at ways for us to deal with that. And in the process, got very, very involved in essentially the path of interior design profession, proving through evidence-based work the impact that interior design has on health, safety, and welfare. I was seeing case after case after case of real harm that can come from interior design practice, and yet many of our laws are organized to say that interior designers impact only the aesthetic side of things. And so that turned my research effort and brought me, by and large, to the academic side of things. So I teach, I research, and I do a lot of consulting work to help keep that connection in the profession. So it is an interesting path. It really revolves around research and that notion that we are not just consumers of research. As designers, we are generators of that research and finding ways to solve problems. And Laura, you said it really well when you talked about the happy accidents in your projects. And you know, I talk to students about this all the time, and it sounds really crazy, but I think it's something that we we need to do better at talking to our clients about, because everybody expects perfect projects. And the reality is, I've been in this business a long time. I've never seen one. Sarah, Laura, have you ever run into a perfect project? And in fact, it's all research. It's all an experiment. You can use your best professional judgment, but in reality, it is the first time in this place that you've put these things together for this client to work in this particular way. And frankly, chances are by the time your project is done, their business may have changed, their people may have changed, their technologies may have changed. This is all one great grand experiment. And the idea is that you are learning every time through happy accidents and good judgment about what works and what doesn't, and how you begin to apply that and how your firms begin to apply that is just an exciting, what's exciting for me about this profession. So we may come back to this, but in terms of offering you advice, just be open to opportunities. You know, I am approaching 60 years old, and up until 10 years ago, I had never filled out a job application. Really interesting. Every job was either the result of someone I met, an opportunity that arose, an opportunity that I made for myself. And it's that network that builds your career. It's not a job application. It's how you see one thing leading to another, and your passion shifts and changes and moves, and being flexible and adaptable like you all are learning in our COVID environment. That is really key to being a good designer for your clients and a good designer in person for you. Being open to all of that.
The screen, see my pictures? All right, awesome. Wow, ladies, that was cool. So I learned a lot. I think that I'm also in the squiggle line club in terms of how we start, what we think, and where we end up. I think I had a whole lot prepared, but I think I'm just going to kind of riff a little bit off of what Laura and Katherine have shared. I think first and foremost, I think similar to our friends here, I'm an optimist and I'm an activist. And I do believe that design can positively impact people and communities and the planet. So for me, I come from a place of purpose, right? And early on, I recognized that the thing that I liked the most was to learn. I'm just a learner, and I'm super, super curious, and I'm not shy about it. It's important to say I was born in New York. I out myself all day long about that because I'm going to be speaking directly, and I do that with our clients. So my squiggly line started at a small liberal arts school called Antioch in Ohio, where you design your own degree program. And at Antioch, I got a degree in communications and art. And I went on to, I spent a year in Paris learning about film and became a filmmaker and a video maker. Went to New York. My first job out of school was at the Whitney Museum in the Department of Film and Video for the curator there. And I met somebody and they said, why don't you all come to Minneapolis? He was the Dean of Fine Arts at the time there at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, and said, you know, why don't you teach a little bit, because many of the things that I'd learned in Paris had not yet been translated. So I started studying and teaching at MCAD and thought I should get another degree. I think I was maybe 20 years old at the time. So I had grown up in New York around builders. My father was a lawyer for some big builders. I was always watching construction fields. And I was always one of these right brain, left brain people. It's kind of very artistic, but also very analytical. So I am an architect. I think that's important also to out myself here in this crowd. However, I did learn early in my career that I had a particular propensity towards, again, as my new friends here, around the experience of people, the social, cultural attributes of how space makes you feel, how it might inspire, how it brings us together, or perhaps not. And so I was very, very based in wanting to be on the ground, talking and learning about how people's aspirations around space and their expectations of how the space should perform for them, not just functionally, but aspirationally, qualitatively. So fast forward, then I got 2 degrees in architecture, undergrad and a graduate degree. And I have worked in small firms. I worked in medium-sized firms. I now work, I think, in the largest design firm in the world, maybe. And I've also had my own practice. I taught at the University of Minnesota as an adjunct faculty member in design. So kind of been around the block a little bit. I've tried it all. As I say, I pretty much have done every job in the firm from, you know, plotting drawings, drawing drawings, or being the president and founder of a firm. So I'm at Gensler now. And at Gensler, I lead teams. I also lead what we call community impact. Oh, I should advance my slide, sorry. Though I do love this one photo. All right, how's that? Ta-da! I lead what we call community impact. I'm also the liaison in our region for the Research Institute, which Gensler, so if anyone is interested in research, Gensler is a wonderful one, just an amazing place to land. And our Research Institute is actually comprised of anthropologists and economists and behavioral studies and, you know, you name it. And what Gensler does is a proportion of profits goes to research. So as a designer and architect at Gensler, in fact, one can apply for a grant with your pals, with your friends, with your new friends from Colorado, and create a team around a question and submit for a grant. Then you get the grant, then you do the work, you get published. So it's pretty cool. So I did that as it related to public libraries as part of social infrastructure. So we did that for 2 years. So I did that. I'm also on the board of several nonprofits, and so that's been important to me. But let me get into the work. So also big thanks again to Taylor Carreri. It was so nice to be invited. And Taylor and I had a chat and said, you know, why don't you come and talk about what you do? So what I focus on at Gensler, and always really have throughout my career, although I did spend a fair amount of time doing workplace, I am focused on what we call community sector. Sometimes I'll term it public sector. And here's some examples in that marketplace. So it's governmental buildings. So think of city halls and police stations and fire stations, lots of libraries, higher ed, education, urban design, community centers, cultural centers, and nonprofits. So it's typically where the dollars are coming from grants or governmental bonding, et cetera, and that there's always it's not private sector, again, it's not privately held companies. So that's what I do. And part of what, again, is very, very different about that is where the dollars come from. Because when you're spending public dollars, there's a tremendous amount of accountability that's required on a project. There's a tremendous amount of what I'm going to call lavish communication on a project. It's very, very important for everybody to be able to report around the work that we're doing, the function of the report of what we're doing, how we're spending those dollars, because those are dollars that the public is initiating. So there's a very high level of record keeping And there's a very high level of really, really making every dollar count. And again, what Laura and Catherine was talking about quite a bit had to do with this pre-design notion, this notion of strategy, of really learning and understanding in the deepest way, what is the purpose of this building? What should the experience be? It's got to be more than we need 4 rooms, one to house this, one to house that, we're going to come in, we're going to come out. There really needs to be a functional aspect. And if we don't ask those questions, we've all seen what those buildings and spaces might look like. So the more questions we ask, the richer the experience we can create these environments, and that's our job. So that's a little bit about that. Oops. So again, I'm currently very involved in figuring out where the money is, because coronavirus, of course, has shaken us up a little bit. And interestingly, of course, the public sector is very, very busy right now, both adjusting to, let's call it day one, when we all return. And the private sector is, of course, also really, really busy. We're very, very busy working on what life will look like when we return to work and or return to office or return to campus or what have you. So it's an interesting time. The other really important part, and again, this was touched on earlier, is if you love to get in the mix and you love to ask questions, research is marvelous, but this is, public sector. In order to do that building, you've got to be an active listener. You've got to be able to frame questions so that the public, from kindergartners to senior citizens to everybody in between, that you can elicit and frame questions or activities so that you can get meaningful feedback that you can then translate into space, into an experience that really, really responds to the needs of the community. So that's where my heart is. And we do that in all different kinds of ways. I love that notion somebody was talking about. I made a note and of course lost it on my page here. Boy, I learned some new terms here, cognitive disfluency. But what it makes me think about is we have this term at Gensler, which is called design to the edge. And what that means is that there is no one size fits all. There is no typical. And so what we do very intentionally is think about, when we're doing a library space, for example, well, what does a family look like? What should family spaces be like? What should the children's collection be like? In fact, I worked for a library, and we learned that right up the street was a facility for mentally disabled adults. And they came to visit that children's section every week in the existing library. So we designed the children's area not to have just lots of little bitty, primary color chairs, but so that adults could come and use that collection as well. So the more that we know about our people, the more that we know about our community, and the more deeply we get into that, the better off we are. So those are some images of lots of fun that we have. I think the other important thing, which we haven't talked about, and I encourage everybody to stay on top of new research and learning as it relates to what I'm going to call the climate crisis, because the work that we do in the interiors world, which again, I should have said, partway through my career, as I said, I realized that my passion, my feel was for people and in interiors. So I was the director of interior architecture, director of interiors at a number of firms, because and I was always, and I sort of note there's always been a bit of a tension sometimes between architects and interior designers. We don't feel that at Gensler whatsoever. And in my career, it's always been my goal and my job actually to bridge that, to bring everybody to have integrated teams of just really super smart, interested people that just want to do great work together. It doesn't really matter what your title is and where you're coming from, because we all need to do the most that we can. But as it relates to interiors, the materials that we're all selecting and specifying. This is a very, very important area for us all to get highly, highly educated about. Carbon neutrality, climate challenges, and just, I'm not going to go into this, I could talk about this all day long, but I won't. And just resilience, wellness. I mean, I remember when I first started my career and I said something to my boss, oh, you know, I just wanted, you know, so-and-so to be happy, the client to be happy. He's like, we're not in the business of happiness. It's just like, well, you know what, I will tell you today we are. We do want people to be happy. I want to be happy, and I want them to feel happy when they go. I want them to have a sense of wellness. Some people have said that 9/11 heightened our understanding and our response in the work that we do as it relates to security and safety. And the pandemic has heightened our awareness around wellness, right? And our sense of a community, how resilient we are as a community. And that is going to be impacting our environments. It's going to be impacting our design and our architecture and interior design, and as is resiliency as it relates to sustainability. So please just keep educating yourself. Then I wanted to just show a couple little projects, and I won't spend too much time on them, but it's always nice to see pretty pictures. So Columbia College, Chicago Art Center again, just another great example of public sector architecture. Again, one of the reasons I love it is because they don't want a building that's going to last 20, 25 years, right? So we're building 50, 100-year buildings. And so there's a sense both sustainable and resilient, but also you've got to be able to pick materials that are going to weather and do systems that are highly efficient. So this is just a great sensibility of the public space. And again, this was a highly sustainable project so that you can see everything looks a little bit pared down, and that was intentional. This is one of my favorite projects, Ford Foundation of Social Justice. And I thought it's important, again, based on the conversation we're having, where the brief was, so this will just tell you, it wasn't, yeah, we got a list of, you know, all the rooms and spaces and all of, you know, classrooms, convening spaces, et cetera. What they told us was that the building was to promote the inherent dignity of all people. So that's when you enter a project with your heart. You can't just sketch up bubble diagrams. You need to be able to say, what does that mean? And how can I positively impact the people that are going to be part of this? One of the designers on this, a friend of mine in New York, said, we have called this the bold whisper, this project, because it's so powerful and so strong. It also won one of the coveted coat awards, which is an AIA award. I thought this was a cool one, City Hall in Washington. So again, highly sustainable in a mountainous area. It's got a pretty sophisticated ventilation system. And so we thought that that was pretty cool, but you can see it's nice and clean, nice lines, some reminiscent kind of, you know, to the environment there in terms of forms and shapes. Ridgedale Public Library, a library I was involved with. Again, this is a big renovation. Much of this project was not so sexy. It was redoing all the boilers and chillers and doing a replacement of all the lighting for energy efficiency, but we also managed to make it a really, really wonderful place for families. And this is actually that space where the adults who utilize the children's collection come. This is that library. I thought this is a great one to see as well. This is the American Embassy in London, in fact. And I took a few notes. Carbon neutrality, optimizing daylight, leather, stone, metals, just a real play as it related to lightness and darkness. This is a great project, urban design in Baltimore. And the reason that I wanted to show it to interior designers is because here we are creating rooms outside. And this was a pro bono project that Gensler did in partnership with the city, as you can see, during the pandemic, to revitalize a streetscape so that businesses could continue to flourish. Wallace Hannenberg Youth Center in California. This was the sheriff had a foundation for youth. So we worked with them where, the walls pivot up. You can see it's very, very affordable materials in order to make a gymnasium, a place where the kids could come, where there could be homework help and gather. ICP, International Center of Photography. This was a remodel in New York City where the school and the galleries came together for resilient spaces, again, around collections and learning. Okay, get involved. So my last message to everybody. So at Gensler, I'm very, very lucky to lead what we call community impact. And what that does mean, as I shared earlier, is any time that we want to get involved with either pro bono or low bono work for nonprofits, we're out there. So Genslerites volunteer in the community a lot, and it makes our lives better. It makes the lives around us better, and then we can authentically be part of the communities which we love, learn and do and be part of things. So everyone's got a message here. I would just say be involved, just say yes. I mean, try to just spend, dare yourself for 3 months to just say like yes when someone says, hey, you want to come join me? I'm going to be doing something or try something new. Just be safe, but say yes. So there it is, creating a better world through the power of design. That is the mantra at Gensler. I believe it. It's what we do. This project is another group that I'm involved with, which is the 826, which is writers, a nonprofit for writers for 3rd grade through 9th grade. And I think I got through all of that. And there you have it. So
Thank you so much. And thank you so much to all three of you. This was absolutely phenomenal. Sorry. Is it all right? We're running a little late, but I could listen to all three of you all day. Do you ladies mind if we stay on a little bit for some questions?
I'm happy to be here.
Not at all.
Okay. We do have some prepared, but does anyone have any that they'd like to jump in with before I go with our prepared ones?
I do. I'm Gabby. I actually hope to do evidence-based design for healthcare. So I have experienced a lot of pushback when I express that I want to do research, mostly from people not in design. But I'm wondering if that's something that, because you, all three of you are kind of not what people think of when they think of interior designers, whether that's the kind of pushback or questioning is something you've experienced and how you cope with that when it occurs.
Pushback. I got a lot of questioning. What are you thinking? Why are you doing that? Sure. People were really baffled, for example, why I would get a degree in education. That was something that came up, or why cognitive science. I don't think it matters what people think, to be honest. I think if you feel like you're excited about it and you're embracing it, go for it. And don't be so worried about whether your path is conventional. I think one thing, hopefully you heard from everyone here, is we all had circuitous paths. And the other thing is a lot of yeses. And I was like, that sort of living your life as a sort of yes and, oh, that sounds cool. Sure, I'll do that. I'll try that.
Well,
Yeah,
if I can add to
right
that
on.
too,
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, you never know. I mean, curiosity, and some of it just depends on the definition of research. And I think design has a very broad definition of research, and I think it's important to think about that. We have to have information to make all kinds of decisions, and you never know where that information is going to come from. I told you that I spent a lot of time going to chemistry classes in my undergraduate career. It never occurred to me at some point that I would be designing a free electron laser laboratory at Vanderbilt University. It was just understanding, maybe not the physics involved, but the way science approaches their issues. It helped me frame questions that helped them think about their answers, right? And so I'm older than everybody else on the call. And I'll give you another example of just even understanding research as an approach. So I designed back in the early 80s with a project team, a juvenile justice facility in Nashville, Tennessee. Now this will sound like a normal thing now, but it was the first facility in the United States to bring all of the social services that juveniles require in helping them maneuver through the system along with the courts. It was also early enough that we knew we wanted to do a green building, but LEED didn't exist. There weren't green standards at that time. And so we were slogging our way through trying to find ways to do things. And I'll just give you one weird example. So this particular building served the county and the city. And because we were bringing all these agencies from all these offices all around, they were bringing with them some furnishings and lots of files and things from all over the place. And old government facilities always have bugs, right? We were in a building that we had determined was going to be as green as we could possibly make it. And we knew we couldn't or didn't want to use any sort of insecticide. So we had some chemicals, early chemicals on our list that we were not going to allow. So how do we deal with that situation? This is where the research comes in. So I was in Nashville, so we were very close to Vanderbilt University, and I contacted an entomologist there who deals with bugs. And together we put together a survey to figure out exactly what critters there might be coming in this building and how to handle it. And the least impactful thing we could come up with, now it probably didn't have a really good carbon footprint, we know a lot more now, but all of the common denominator for all of these little critters was that they couldn't live through more than 36 hours in freezing temperatures. So we actually set up a sequence of, I think there were 6 or 7 tractor trailer trucks that are there in frozen environments, and we moved absolutely everything out of one facility, 36 hours in that space, and then moving into the next. Kind of a bizarre solution, but you work with what you have at hand, and you kind of have your Apollo 11 team together, and you figure out how is it that we're going to work with what we know, what we have, and how can we create new solutions to that. It was definitely a research-based piece. Now we have a lot more evidence-based research and lots of additional information on chemicals and other things. But you think about this, how much life has changed and how much life will change. And I think Sara mentioned, be curious and learn about what's coming next and what's happening now, because it's all going to be changing, and research becomes that key piece to design. So yeah, don't listen to the naysayers. Ask them a question, turn it on them. You know, what do you think research is important, or why isn't research important? Right? You know, help give them some examples. Every time we have that opportunity, we are bringing someone along with us. That design is a very important part of everyone's experience.
Hey, Gabby, I think the most important thing that you shared is that you want to do it around health.
I do.
So who cares? You just do you. You just do you. I think that's the cool thing too. I mean, we're all in school, but you're all just, if you know, you've just take the initiative. Please. This is the most important time for everybody to be asking all kinds of questions about a million things.
Yeah,
You
bring
probably
your
have more questions
passions.
than me, so I wouldn't listen to anybody. I mean, just, if you need something as it relates to school and credits and all those kind of things, I'm not the person to ask. But I can tell you, be you. Just be you fully.
If I could ask a follow-up question, when you're working in a firm, what do you do if you feel like research is important and a client is pushing back?
Somebody recently said, somebody on this call, I think it was Catherine, said something about, what you're trying to persuade or tell, but truly what we're in the business of doing is educating all day long. And I think honestly, we all need to humbly come to that table too, and say, I was at some point when you're working with a client, there comes a switch when they suddenly realize that you are shoulder to shoulder with them, that it's not business as usual, that the work that you do is really personal, that you really do care. And at that point, they begin to trust, they begin to really wonder what you're thinking too, because it isn't just your job. It's because you really do care, because you have a purpose. They have a purpose, you have a purpose. And so I think just being a human being, and just sharing curiosity, and that you don't have every answer, but that you're wondering, and would they like to wonder along with you? And you know what, honestly, when I said to you, just do it, that happens on projects too, and that's why I'm consumed by the work. Because if the project cannot support all the research and wondering that I'm doing, I do it because I'm a lifelong learner, because I'm curious and I want to know. And if I can apply it to that job or that client, awesome. If not, that's okay. I'm curious. So just do you.
Your clients will come along with you. As Sarah said, actually, one of my favorite moments on every project is when you're sitting around the table with your clients and everyone is fighting for the pencil or the pen to talk about the project, to draw on the project. And in fact, as a rule, in my firm, we don't start producing computer generated presentation materials until well after schematic design. Even if you do the design work on CAD, you print it out and you draw over top of it on tracing paper, because our clients don't maybe always speak the language we do, and they think, oh, that's formal, it's finished, it's expensive if we move it, right? And they start feeling like they're not part of the design process. And so I want it hand drawn so that we can talk about it and they can feel comfortable drawing on it. And that conversation is such a beautiful moment when we're all so excited about the project that we all want to feed back at the same time.
All right, we're gonna have a thumb wrestle on this one though, Catherine, because I love to sketch and I like to draw, and I think that's good, but everybody has a different methodology. So some people make a model and some people like to do anything. And I think in today's world with Revit and Rhino and fly-throughs and VR, we are all over it. So however you feel like visualizing and playing, go do it.
I'm with you, Sarah. My point is,
that was a good story. But
engaging
Just
your
be,
client
yeah,
in the
just,
conversation
yes,
and
agree, totally
helping
agree,
them come along with you.
totally agree.
It's not about you telling them what they should do. It's about that open conversation about what they learn from you about their opportunities.
Agree,
Thank you.
agree.
I actually have a question. I have a question for Catherine, and I was wondering about you were talking about you designed your own, or you started your own firm, and my mom created her own firm. She's a landscape architect, and I really look up to that, and I've been thinking about it recently, and I want to plan on starting my own firm sometime, but it seems really, really, crazy to think that that could even be possible. And I know I would definitely have to go out into the field and get some experience to make sure that I know what I'm doing, and that I would want to test the fields that I would want to go into, because I have a couple of things that I'm kind of interested in. But I guess my question is, do you have any recommendations for starting your own firm or planning on starting a firm in the future, of things to look out for, things to plan ahead for, or just some things that you wish you knew before you did it?
Great question. I've actually started 2 firms, and my husband, who's an architect, has his firm as well. So we've been entrepreneurs from early on. I, of course, wish I took a few more business classes early on. But you know, how do I describe this? Being brave is part of it. I know for me, I felt when I was very young when I started my first design firm, and it was quite successful. But I always felt like people thought maybe I was too young to do it. Like no one ever said it, but I wondered, did they think I knew enough about it? And in my mind, you know, what was the perfect age? There isn't one. It's what you feel is right. But it takes some bravery. So, for instance, one of the most liberating moments in my entrepreneurship world was when I got brave enough to fire a client. That, you know, you are committed to what's important to you and what you believe in, and that commitment has to go on. There are challenges, though, especially if you have others working for you, and just, you know, thinking through that, making sure you're not the bottleneck, that you can empower the people who are working with you to do what they need to do, and expressing themselves. It becomes a community. I think about it as not my firm, it's everyone's firm, and I think that is an important piece of it. But yeah, take a couple of business classes. Even if you're not going to be the principal of your own firm, finances run everyone's decisions. Our clients have to pay attention to this. Sarah's community projects, they at public service projects, you have to be good stewards of other people's money, right? So understanding what drives decisions, and often you'll see that many of the research projects we're talking about, the evidence-based projects we're talking about, are often proving design's value. It's proving a return on investment. It's trying to put a value that makes sense to someone else's decision-making process, right? We all know in our hearts that these are the right decisions to make, but sometimes we have to help prove that to others. And so understanding how business models are driven will be helpful for you.
I actually am I'm planning to do an entrepreneurship minor, just because I thought, hey, why not? And my mom pointed out that even if I don't start my own firm and I'm just in a bigger, like a ginormous company, you know, it's important to know finances so you can help the bosses and, you know, be an ally and not somebody that they have to teach something to. So I definitely am, I know what you're talking about, and I've been
It's not the
planning that.
only thing. And I think Sarah mentioned it too. Sometimes you do things because it's the right thing for you, or you're curious about it, or you choose to invest extra time in as well. But it's important to understand, especially if there are others depending on you for food on their table. So that's important to think about. But my best advice is surround yourself with really, really smart people.
Well, thank you all so much. And I do want to be respectful of your time, and we appreciate you coming. And this is super helpful, especially from someone who doesn't know what they want to do with their degree. So thank you all for coming. It's really been wonderful.
I want to thank everybody. Honestly, this has been a special evening for me. It's like kind of like a whole bunch of new friends and getting together over a cup of coffee late, and so after the workday. So I am very appreciative. I learned a lot. So I hope that everybody takes away at least something that makes us all think about something in a different way to kind of make the world a better place. So I am very, very grateful to you, Ms. Taylor. And I'm very, very grateful to have been invited, and very, very nice to have met all of you. So thank you so much.
What she said.
And let's do some research together, us three.
Awesome.
Well, thank you all so very much. And it's truly fun to see that there are so many possibilities, and I think we're all going to take away a lot of information from tonight.
Well, feel free to reach out if you have something you want, questions offline. You know, feel free to share my information, or you know, reach out. We have, you know, a lot of people out here who are in the practice who would love to help however we can.
Absolutely.
Thank you, guys.
Right.
Go play in the snow.
Yeah, thank you. Take good care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
See ya.